Hello from Santiago, Chile, and welcome to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on people with some connection to Latin America. My guest today is Sean Park, co-founder of GroupRaise, a Magma portfolio company that is the tastiest way to change the world. You may have heard about GroupRaise on episode 5 of Crossing Borders with Sean's co-founder, Devin Baptiste, but Sean and I break new ground. And if you listen to 5, you'll definitely still enjoy this episode as well. Everyone knows how to book a restaurant table for 1 to 8 people, but what happens if you want to book for a group of 30 or 50 or even more? GroupRaise solves this problem by letting you book online, and as an added bonus, restaurants compete over your business and donate a percentage of the bill to the organization or the charity of your choice. Sean, originally from South Korea, talks about his journey to co-founding GroupRaise, which took him to Canada as a high schooler, where he stayed on to do university, then back to Korea to serve in the military, and then back to Canada to start GroupRaise. Sean now manages 10 people in GroupRaise's Santiago office, and we talk about leadership, hiring, and values, and what it's like working remotely leading the Latin American office of a U.S. company, something that we haven't covered on any previous podcast before. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sean Park. Hey, Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, thanks for taking the time to do it. So where are we today?
We are actually at the back of our Santiago office, sitting together in this small table.
We are in Magma Partners, overlooking the nice view of Santiago and the Andes.
Still pretty foggy.
It's still foggy.
Yeah.
So what brought you to Chile?
I get that question actually a lot. And I think my answer always starts with Startup Chile. It's pretty much a great reason to be here, right? It's a government-run program where my startup, GroupRaise, it was invited 2014, I believe. And so we got here. We're here for about 6 months, and then after we got into Scale, which was another follow-on fund, and from there we just started hiring people. So I ended up staying here, but obviously that's more of an official answer. But I just love living here. And I never thought that I would stay here that long because I didn't know much about the country and the living situation, but I just fell in love with, the lifestyle you can have with nature and like the people and the culture, the language. Everything just made me stick to this type of environment, and now I'm here.
And so can you just do a quick overview of GroupRaise? So for people listening, we've done a really long, great podcast with Sean's co-founder, Devin. It's episode 2, I believe. And you can go back and listen to the in-depth story of GroupRaise. But just for this podcast, so what's GroupRaise do?
Yeah, by the way, that podcast is amazing. So you should definitely go and listen to it. So GroupRaise, we help people like moms, sorority girls, or charity supporters raise money at restaurants by eating. It's simply where, if you need, funds for anything you want to do, you can invite your friends and family out to eat, and whatever you pay, a percentage, from 15 to 50%, depending on the restaurant, goes back to what you care. And we've been doing it in the U.S. now with over 8,000 restaurants. And it's definitely on the growing every single day, and we're just in it.
And so where are you from originally?
I'm from South Korea, and I lived in Canada for about 10 years before I came to Chile.
And where in South Korea?
Well, it's I'm from the Campo, so it's called Gwanghwaewan. No one knows where it is, but it's close to a city called Cheongju. And so it's mid part of Korea.
And when did you move to Canada? How old were you?
I was 14. So I just finished my first year of middle school.
So you would have had both cultures then really, really strong.
Right. And which was also very difficult being alone in a new country with really no English.
And what city did you go to in Canada?
Hamilton, close to Toronto. Yeah.
And what made you go to Canada?
I actually have a pretty interesting story. So my parents didn't really have much international background or experience. So, but they got this idea from one of their friends whose daughter was studying in Canada, and they liked the idea. So they were like, okay, do you want to go? Right. It was just light suggestion, and I took it. Obviously, I had my friends here. I had no idea of what Canada was, and no idea of what living outside of Korea was. So that didn't interest me at all. So I said no, and I went back to school. I told my friends, "Hey, my parents told me about this, so I might go to Canada." So somehow my conversation went into I'm going to Canada to my friends. So I went back home. I told my Mom, I told my friends, so I have to go to Canada. So that's really how I decided to really go abroad and study.
That's really interesting because that's a very kind of parallel story to one of my best friends from university who's from Korea.
Okay.
And his parents wanted him to study abroad, and he wasn't so sure about it, but ended up going and ended up at a small private religious school in North Carolina.
Typical.
And so what did you end up with?
No, so I ended up somewhere I just did not expect. It was 90% Chinese students and maybe 5% Korean and 5% Latinos, right?
Interesting.
So pretty much no English spoken, a lot of Chinese. My roommate was Chinese, so I learned how to basically swear in every possible way in Chinese. And, all of that was great, but I just couldn't really learn a lot of English. Yeah, that was a problem there.
And so how long did you stay there through school?
It was just 1 year to learn English because I really spoke nothing, close to nothing. And funny enough, my name was also different. My name then was Jamel. It was because of I think my English teacher back in Korea who gave me an option to be Jamel without explaining that it was a black name. So I took that name to Canada and I used it for about 4 years in my high school. So it was hard making friends in high school, really. Yeah,
that's really funny.
Yeah.
I forget what my Spanish name was in middle school, but if people had to pick still and live by their Spanish names they picked in middle school and high school, I think they'd have a different life.
Exactly. I mean, as you know, the name does a lot to you and
it does.
People. So yeah. So I had to change to Sean.
To Sean.
Yeah.
And so when did you go back to South Korea after the first year?
Yeah. So going to South Korea was more like a yearly kind of annual trip because my whole family was there, and I was studying in Canada, which meant that during vacations and whenever I had time, I was able to go back and spend time with family.
And so you finish high school and you're going back and forth. What did you do next?
So I went to college in Toronto, and third year I actually went to Taiwan for an exchange program, where I met my co-founder. But then right after that, I went to the military. So as some of you know, Koreans are generally required to go to serve military for 2 years. And I did that. I was a medic at a military hospital, working with the U.S. military. And that was actually a turning point for a lot of things that happened in my life with my 20s. Yeah.
And what was your day-to-day like?
As a medic, I worked at a hospital. So basically, when a patient comes in, I would screen them. So screening means you measure the blood pressure and anything that's necessary for the doctor to know. So I would put that in the system after measuring and then basically send them to doctors.
So before we get to the turning point,
right.
What would you say you learned during that time, either just in the military itself
right.
or as a medic, that you take forward to today, either in business or just personal life?
Yeah, there's a lot of it actually. Obviously then I didn't know anything that, I just felt like I was wasting time because it was really restricted things you could do. But luckily I was able to have the opportunity to lead my unit for about 7 months, which was a long time given that my whole, time was 2 years, right? So in that 7 months, I was able to exercise, you're 21, but you're in charge of 55 people. So you can do a lot of things, from culture building to making rules, I don't know, eliminating the things that you don't want from the culture. Or there's a lot of things that came with living together with 55 different people from all different backgrounds, although they're all Koreans, was really I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot to a point where I realized that this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. Not being in the military, but more in the sense of like just being able to create opportunities for people and like create culture around them so that they could be an organization together. It was really fun. And that's what got me to think about other paths like, being a startup.
And what's your opinion on compulsory service like that? Is that something that, like, for in the US, we don't have that?
Right.
Is that something that you think is, could be interesting for people to do? Maybe not just military, but maybe you can do Peace Corps or other types of things. Or is that something that you think is, maybe outdated and you don't have to talk about the Korean context necessarily, but for other places?
That's a great question. And I always think that if I wasn't Korean, I would have never had the opportunity to be in a setting of a military, in a setting of very like traditional, restricted, you follow orders, you're part of this massive organization. At the same time, in that organization, I was able to have some authority, some, ruling and like, leadership opportunities. And I don't think that I was able to have that kind of leadership opportunities when I was 21, right? Especially if like when my friends were looking for, internship positions in accounting, like, finance, and all of that just seemed very much like, serving coffee or, when I was able to actually, have 55 people listen to what I said.
Yeah, I would say most people, even at like a US university, 21, they're just like thinking, how many shots can I do at the bar?
That's right. Right.
Maybe their leadership at most is organizing a GroupRaise event. But other than that, there's not a lot of people who are going to school in the US that are probably having that same sort of experience.
Exactly. I'm not saying that I did not have that party part as well. I did have that as well, but I think just the 2 years that when I felt trapped, right? When I felt like, this wasn't what I wanted, but that was really when like the things that happened in military, I remember the most vividly because, well, some of it was negative, but some of it was something that I could have never expected in my life that just happened. Not because of me, but because I was Korean, right? And those things turned out to be really amazing, especially in my professional life, the things that I learned.
And so what did you do after the military?
So I remember once I was done, it was July, and I was going back to school to finish my university last year in September. And I remember one day before I went back to Canada, I got on a phone call with Devin, and this was really the phone call that formed my future. And this was about doing GroupRaise together. And I don't know, just that phone call made me realize there were two things that I really wanted to do that I was able to, I saw myself doing in GroupRaise. Well, actually really three things. And one was working with Devin. So Devin and I met as roommates in Taiwan, and just talking to him and spending time with him was just really amazing learning. And I felt like I could be a better person just by being with him. And so like being able to work with him and something really cool was like, okay, perfect. But then there are other two reasons. One being like my idea of startup was like, oh, I could be a leader. Whenever we start hiring people, I could build a culture, build a team, and all of those things that I really enjoyed, being in the military. I can do that in a more meaningful and like bigger way. That, obviously took time. It took about 5 years since, till we hired our first employee. But now, that is definitely, happening. And that's the biggest part I enjoy about my job. And the last one was creating social impact. And this was really it just came from my experience of doing volunteering work in the military. There was some that happened in the military because I was a soldier, but also because I had some time to do other things, right? So it allowed me for volunteering to help translate letters that were coming from, adoptees to their birth mothers, right? Things like that you don't really, you don't normally do, but you had the time. And, I think military has also taught me to, do good things for the world. So that became an important value in me, and just realized like what GroupRaise ultimately wanted was drive and help people like, school moms and, sorority girls that don't have the resources to do the things that they want to do. But, we can help that by partnering with local businesses And that aspect just was really inspiring. And at the same time, just thought it was just an easy decision to make because of those three reasons.
And so when you had that call, were you in Korea still?
I was still in Korea.
And did you stay working in Korea, or did you end up moving to do GroupRaise?
So I went back to finish my school, and I think for that 1 year, I was helping out with things part time. And as soon as I finished, I moved downtown away from my school, and I started full time with GroupRaise. Well, obviously, we didn't make a lot of cash in the beginning, so I had some jobs here and there, especially in the weekends. Especially, I worked at Chipotle. I worked at restaurants, and I intentionally did that because I had no background or understanding of how restaurants would operate. And just working there and being basically the lowest employee, I just saw how managers work and employees work together, and even the managers work with their managers. And all of that was just so much learning, and obviously tough, hard work in the weekends. But all of that was amazing.
So what did you learn specifically about the restaurant business that while you were working there that you could use or still use for GroupRaise today?
Well, one thing I know for sure is that they're just freaking busy.
Yeah.
They don't have time. So making decisions like this is somewhat difficult when like people try to approach you. And so there's always times where people can talk, right? The non-busy hours. And even then, like, managers are always busy with other things. They're just bombarded with operations, marketing, whatever it is. You have to run this freaking place, right? So, just finding the right time to, talk and also understand their language, right? They don't ever use the term revenue. They always say sales. Little things like that definitely help you if you're writing like cold email to a restaurant manager, right? So, I think I just learned to develop a relationship with people who work in a restaurant setting.
And what about just in terms of managing a team and leadership, being sort of the lowest rung at I guess Chipotle is not fast food, but what is it? Kind of slow.
Fast casual.
Yeah. What did you learn about managing people?
So interestingly, my manager got fired 3 months into my work, and I saw that, and she was an amazing manager, but got fired because of poor relationships she managed with other managers from other stores. And I saw that, and, it's not just about making your employees happy. That I totally respect, and I think that is one of the top priorities as a manager to have. But it's also about, how to run an organization together, how to be culturally fit as a leader. And it doesn't just come from you. It comes from everyone, that are managers, that are, directors, that are CEOs, So if you don't take part and if you don't, fit into the culture that, comes from the company, then it's really not for you. And I saw that really in a not so positive way, because I really enjoyed working with her. And, I even had, it was good actually. I had talk with her manager as she was getting fired, to talk about her and talk about what you think. And, and I remember asking a question to this manager guy, how would you like prevent this from happening in the future? And the guy actually never thought about this. So, and I still have in contact with him, and, he still works at Chipotle, but yeah, really, there's a lot of questions that I think, come to mind. Especially when we work with managers, not just employees. And I think when running a bigger organization, there's definitely layers that you have to manage differently.
And so when did GroupRaise become, so you were in Canada, the rest of the team was in Houston, or was Devin in Hawaii at this point?
Right. So when I was in Canada, so I was in Toronto for a year, and I was in Montreal for another year. And I believe Devin moved to Hawaii in the second year. And, I think the rest of us, Paul and Kevin, were still in Houston. So, yeah, we're just moving until we got to Chile, where we all reunited.
So you guys were remote first for a couple of years.
For a while, yeah. Well, we did also an accelerator program in Dallas. That's when I spent a lot of time. That was when Devin was in Hawaii. Kevin and I went to Dallas for 3 months to this program together. Yeah.
And had you met Kevin and Paul for extended periods of time when you decided to join up? Or was it all just based on, look, I have this great relationship with Devin, I'll follow him, let's do this?
I think it was more like that. Like, I trusted Devin, and so that trust kind of like, it was easier to build trust with other people that came with Devin. And especially if you met Kevin and Paul, and those guys are trustworthy guys. Like, you can build trust in no time. And so for me, it wasn't difficult at all with the fact that we've never really spent time together. So Dallas was really interesting. I lived with Kevin, I worked with Kevin, and we were in the same car because he was the only one with the car. So basically spending 24/7 with a guy that I only worked online, and now we're all physically together and having this one life together was super difficult. Like, we had fights, we had, these things that you would see from a couple, we were doing it every day. And so that was interesting. And because we had that, now we have it's a very special relationship I have with Kevin.
And so the four of you guys are very different. If you put you guys just in a room together and someone wouldn't know you, say you guys wouldn't have almost anything in common, coming from very, very different backgrounds.
Right.
What do you think is the common thread that links you all four together?
That's a great question. I think it's hard to put just one thing, but I think there was a moment.
More than one too.
There was a moment, actually. I tend to talk about this a lot, but is when we got to Dallas. It was the first time where we got some sort of funding. $25K in our bank account, and it was just there. Like, we've never seen cash, we've never touched cash, we never got paid. So this was the first time to talk about payments, right? So how do we get paid? And so, because I've been waiting for this moment, and I'm sure everyone else was. And so, Devin kind of started this conversation with like, hey, how about everyone gets paid $1,000 for 2 months? Reasonable. I can pay my rent with $500 a month, and good start. And then, so I said, yeah, that sounds great. And then a few minutes later, Kevin goes and says, you know what? I actually don't need that much money right now. I live with my parents, and I don't really spend that much money. So I don't think I'll just get, I won't get paid, and you guys just take whatever you need. And suddenly this conversation flipped, and it became like a culture almost. If you need money, you can take it. It's all trust-based, Money is not really important at the moment, right? It's just about kind of like sustaining our lives while we do something great together. And so, like, that conversation led to, just really taking whatever we needed really to survive for more than 2-3 years, for the next 2-3 years. And that's how we operated together. And so the amount of trust that I have with these three guys is not just about the time we spent, but like how we spent it was really also very poor, and at times like exciting, because we're like in this poorest moment, you see a small, spike in revenue, or a spike in the people that are using. It's just so much pleasure to share, right? There's just little things matters so much for all four of us. So, for more than like what we shared together, it was just these small moments that made us, put us together and be where we are now. Yeah.
So I asked Devin on his episode about deciding to go to Chile.
Right.
And I got his view on it.
Right.
What was it like from your perspective? And had you ever even thought of South America and Chile before?
So when we made the decision to come to Chile, I was living in Montreal learning French, right? So I was really excited about this language, because I'm really into languages. And so,
how many total languages do you speak?
Well, I can't say I speak, but I've learned 6 languages in total. So French was like, I'll be speaking more French, and now I can go to France or whatever, right? But then suddenly, like, we want to go to Chile. Nobody knows what's happening there. So, I just assumed that they would eat tacos. So I came down just like everyone else, right? So I did without much thought. All I did to prepare for my, stay in Chile was, Duolingo for 2 weeks, and that was it, right? And I'm here, and the most amazing thing I think for the first stay in Chile, I think for everyone, was the experience that we were able to have with other entrepreneurs from different parts of the world together, just like an exchange program for our college. And, it made a lot of sense, and it really opened our network of startup ecosystems and, different entrepreneurs just in no time, right? Where we were just confined into this online space where we were meeting nobody. The only thing we were going to was networking events where nothing really yielded, right? So yeah, I think that, so I honestly, with zero expectation and, my stay in 2 months, just everything turned out really, really wonderful, I think, for the company and for us as people.
So GroupRaise did the 6 months in Chile, then got Scale, which is Startup Chile's follow-on funding to continue to expand in operations in Chile. What made you decide to stay?
Right. So it was actually really simple. I think I would have not been here if we didn't hire Tammy. So last year around April, we were talking about hiring someone, and I interviewed maybe 5 people, and we're lucky to find Tammy, and we started working together. And honestly, everything just worked out. So when you have your first employee that is disciplined, also that is easy to work with, but at the same time is able to lead people, then hiring the next person is so easy. So we hired Ellie. Ellie was perfect. We could not have asked for, more than, what she brought to us. And she was just a wonderful person. And so we hired another person called Bridget, who's, an amazing marketer and just an amazing person to work with. And so all these hiring decisions that we made were just so lucky, one after another, that making a team here just made a lot of sense as a business. And so, for me, I didn't have to convince anyone that I had to be here. It was just, it had business purpose and also personal purpose of living in this wonderful place. Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what the lifestyle is like and why you like living here so much?
Sure. So one thing that I have to say about, working in Chile is that you actually get to work with a lot of international people. Not just Americans, not just Canadians, people, for example, my team now here, we have 10 people. 3 of them are from Chile, 1 of them Argentinian, 2 of them from Australia, 2 of them from Korea, including myself, and obviously Americans, and the list goes on, because Chile is a place where people look for something different in their life. People come here to experience the culture and also find professional opportunities, and so the values they have is very similar to what we have as founders, like personal values. So finding international people here was really, as I said, really easy and an easy process. Yeah. But on the personal note, I never really was into hiking. I never was into outdoor activities that required a lot of outdoor time, because the fact that I live in Canada where 8 months out of 12 were snowy, right? So I was used to going to gym, but here the weather is just so amazing that you have to get out. And then when you get out within 30 minutes, there are mountains. It's not just, hills. These are the Andes, right? And you can see them as I'm talking, and it's wonderful because it's the accessibility to nature, whether you like mountains or beaches or, or the lakes. It's got it within 2 hours. And sure, it's great to have it, but also it's super easy to get there and do something because the country is, infrastructure is there so that you can take a bus, and in that one bus, which is $10, you can get to a beach and you can start surfing for another $10. So yeah, why not, right? So my weekends, basically bi-weekly, I go out either to the mountains or to the beach. Why not, right? So there is that active lifestyle that I was able to just grow unintentionally because of the accessibility to the things that I'm getting now.
And so professionally, I've talked to a lot of different founders on the podcast about working with a LATAM office from the US, but I haven't asked and gone into deep detail with somebody who's the co-founder that's in the LATAM office.
Right.
So I think you're uniquely positioned to talk about what that's like. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about how you work with the U.S. office and what it's like leading a 10-person team here and the experience doing that?
Right. So I think I mentioned before that one of the drivers I had for GroupRaise was the ability to lead, right? And that finally came true. And I'm like, that is basically I think when you wake up, like what is one thing that, makes you feel excited? I think that is really the people that I get to work with here. And because of that, like I think a lot about how to make sure that people grow professionally. So I think a startup is our destiny that we always talk about growth, right? And yet we talk less about personal growth and professional growth for the people we work with. But for me, I always think that we are able to drive, 100% to 200% from a person when they feel that they're giving and, that they own things, that they're growing as a professional, right? So I put that as a priority as a person who leads. So that's why we have things like Learning Friday, where we talk about a random topic related to GroupRaise or business by bringing an expert, or, we just share our knowledge together, and also Spanish Thursdays. So these initiatives exist so that we are growing as individuals, and that I totally see that working because of not only the company's success, but, the happiness that we can feel from individuals here, and, the feedbacks that I get from, quarterly feedback sessions. And, obviously there's I'm the only co-founder here that limits me to, for example, when things don't work out, you have bad days. What do you say to your employees? Obviously the things that you can share with your co-founders, on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot, there's a lot of worries. There's a lot of happiness. I don't really get to share that often over WhatsApp. That's the challenge, I think. Biggest challenge is to not be able to share some moments physically, but at the same time, it's actually really, your question is very interesting, because when I was invited to a conference in Valdivia where they talked about remote teams and remote cultures. And one of the things that were mentioned was remote working can be easier because individuals are in different places, but remote teams is a different animal, because teams operate, as a group. So whatever is not physically there, you don't have to really communicate, which means if development team is in Houston and the marketing team is in Chile, the only communication that needs to happen seems like something related to marketing, something related to dev, right? Which actually limits the possibility of having more innovations between the two. And I realized that, and that was a problem, right? And it's natural to have that problem because we don't do coffee chats, or we don't do kitchen chats. So, we're still brainstorming and try to put more conversations and communications, across teams to make sure that, we don't miss out on, pains from one another. But, and that's why we also have a dev team now in Chile. But yeah, it's been definitely challenging across different disciplines to really communicate what was not necessary. Everything necessary, yeah, it happens on Trello, it happens on weekly meetings, sure. But, that wasn't all. So we had to be creative in, making sure that those small talks happen even before meetings, or it just find any way so that everyone knows what they're up to, outside of work as well, right? Which is still hard.
So one of the biggest misconceptions that I think people in the US, and especially investors that we've met either in a Magma context of raising money for our funds or helping our founders raise money, is that they say, oh, you have a team in Latin America. Oh, it's outsourcing. You've got a whole bunch of people. You just have them take your orders and they do your stuff. When in fact, that's massively wrong, where you have a core piece of the team here, and you're one of the co-founders is here. So can you talk a little bit about how that misconception isn't right, where it's just the US telling you what to do all day, where there's actually innovation and things happening from the LATAM office?
Right. Well, I think businesses run for like business make decisions based on what makes sense, right? And the decisions come from the people who can make a difference. And I don't think that it's different just because you're in the US or you're in the Philippines or you're in Germany, right? And as long as the team is able to operate at a level where it is sufficient, self-sufficient, and also providing business value that is able to make decisions, it can be anywhere, right? Sure, it's great to be in Chile and have that in Chile because the wage is lower, right? The salaries that we pay is probably, less than half what we could pay in the US. So if you can have that, that is your advantage, not your disadvantage. And I think one of the reasons why it was possible, thanks, of course, there's many other things like Startup Chile giving us the opportunity, and also Magma being able to work together in this space and, investing in us, and all of these things matter. And yet being in Chile was unique because of the kind of people we were able to attract. Being an American company in a country like Chile is actually amazing because people want to work for an American company and they have experience in working for American culture. It's just that it's hard to find opportunities where they feel that they can grow, they can give. And we offer that, right? We're one of the few companies that offer that here in a very effective way. So honestly, if you can do that, it's, I think we all have to think what makes sense for the business, and there's no way in the world where you pay, less than half and bring same or more value to the business.
So talking about same or more value, not just on the local teams, I think one of the things that's interesting about what GroupRaise has been able to do is you have people that get hired from the Houston office that end up down here.
Right.
Because even though maybe they make a little less money, they want the life experience. Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting.
That's exactly it. And that's why I think everyone here is really happy, although we're, some of us are not American. We are really happy that, we get to live here and not in Houston. Well, not to say that, living in Houston is, it's not good.
So can you talk a little bit more about the actual day-to-day here? You said it's a marketing and you've got a little bit of dev.
Right.
Focusing on the marketing, what's kind of the day-to-day that you're working on here?
So, day-to-day, every day is actually somewhat fixed. And I noticed this a few days ago when, as we're growing, there are some things that we just fix per day. For example, Monday we have OKR meeting. Tuesdays and Thursdays we have stand-ups. And Fridays we have Learning Friday. So because of these fixed schedules, our days become more clearer, and it gives us easier direction to be, what today is going to be like, right? So for example, marketing is, I'm sure, if you listen to Devin's podcast, he talks about dividing into weeks. And that is how we run business. So every week we send out most of our communications, whether it's email or whatever it is. Most of our marketing happens from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It's because we tested it with different times and to different set of people. And we just saw that those 3 days and, in the mornings, or depending on the group, in the mornings or afternoons, it just works. So those are the days that where we just work on making sure the communication goes out. And Thursdays and Fridays is about basically prepping for the coming week. And every Monday we look back what happened last week and, basically make sure that we're on the right track. And quarterly we have our goals. And so really, I think the system here is more or less really visible because we work with a calendar. We work with a timeline, especially because it's marketing. It's very time sensitive. If we don't, for example, if I don't email you this week, then I miss a whole week of having the opportunity to have you use GroupRaise, right? So that is always in the back of our mind. So we're constantly, I would say, running. So, but then again, having clear days and structures and, paths only makes it easier for individuals to set up their day and be more effective on delivering those 3-day communications and preparations and review.
So talking about that kind of sort of regimented work, do you think that it's caused by the fact that you have a team in Houston, Philippines, in here? Or do you think that if you were all together, you'd work the same way?
It is definitely, that's actually very interesting. I never thought that way, but I think it is very much caused by other teams as well because of the communication calendar as well, that we have to work with other teams that are in different time zones and different continents. And so, for example, Tuesday is where we all get together as a company to share stats on whether it's marketing, sales, dev, and all these other things. So for that, we have to prepare, and that makes sense for Tuesday because that, gives us an overview of the last week, what happened. And for example, Philippines, we have a team of right now 42 in the Philippines doing a lot of research for our marketing. And like I said, a lot of the preparation happens on Thursdays and Fridays, which means that that's the time we communicate with the leaders in the Philippines, and so pretty much I think being remote teams allow us to be more sensitive about when things needs to be communicated, and that actually makes our lives easier because that allows us for more planned.
So what advice would you give to other teams that maybe are thinking about having this either remote office somewhere else in the world, or more specifically in LATAM, or maybe already have it and want to run more smoothly?
In terms of like communications, or
could be communications, could be splitting up work, could be anything that you think that maybe works really well for you that maybe not be super intuitive that everyone's trying to do.
I think one thing that I want to mention about hiring is that when you're building a team, it's always that first hire that has the most impact on the rest of the hires, right? And that first hire, I think the one very important quality that you look for is leadership. You need to hire a leader to be able to build a team. So like I would at least spend 2 to 3 months together, just the two, or if the time allows, to make sure that the person is able to lead a team with or without you being there, right? And I think that goes for any type of cultures or countries. So let's say once you build a team, I think communication error is just commonly seen everywhere. But to minimize that, one is to talk about the fact that you have communication issues, which actually becomes a very political conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have as a company. The fact that sometimes like employees would tell, for example, the leadership that your communication sucks, right? But that rarely happens, which means that you as founders have to be very sensitive and also, able to listen to what employees feel about like the culture and, how we communicate together. And that's part of the reason why I try to go back every quarter. What we do in Chile is to go back to our culture sheet every quarter to talk about, are we actually what we said we are and how we do things
So what's a culture sheet? And how did you come up with that?
Right. So it is also one of the things that, we started when we were 4 in Chile. And, so my girlfriend, Chloe, has background in a lot of communications and culture building and her master's program. And so I was able to get some ways to actually build some sort of culture that asks basically who you are and what you want to be, and and that incorporates with like how you do things on a day-to-day basis, right? So it goes, from office rules, like, you don't take meetings in the office room, to, we have company lunches every Friday, to, how we communicate, the tools that we use to communicate for what kind of purposes. And all of these things are kind of laid out in this one sheet that, people either feel connected, or if they don't feel connected, then that means that we need to update, right? So by going back every quarter, it allows us for just, one, understanding where we are and how we do things better. And two, if there's any problems, we bring it up. And it's an easier way. It's always easy to bring up an issue when there's an opportunity to do it. So you would never expect anyone to come to you and say, hey, I have some feedback for you. You'd never see that if you're a founder, especially. But if you actually set up feedback sessions or an opportunity to talk about some problems, then that is when, you will find these problems, and that's when we talk about it and we try to either change or just get it off the culture sheet. Yeah.
And so do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, documentary resources that you would recommend either on culture or remote work or just in general about startups or life that you want to share with people?
Yeah. So Zappos, obviously, it's an amazing book on culture. And I read it.
Delivering Happiness.
Delivering Happiness was a book I read not when I was building a culture, but when I wanted to build a culture. I was a lot of inspiration, I think, came from there. And, I think you mentioned in your podcast how important that book, How to Influence People and Start.
The Dale Carnegie book, yeah.
It's just like, you cannot mention it to, it just has to be read.
Yep.
And so I try to go back to it. I actually went back to it last week. Just, it's just as a summary. I just looked it up on YouTube and watched the summary again. Because it's just so helpful as a person to work together side by side, but also as a leader, right? So, obviously, we can name all these books. I just think that it's always important to never be tired of reading books that have to do with communication, leadership, and just being a better person to work with.
And so what advice would you give to yourself going back to when you were first deciding to join up with GroupRaise, knowing what you know today? What advice would you give yourself?
Wow. I wasn't ready for that. So what would I give to my 21-year-old Sean Park, that had no money, not much. I guess like one thing that I wouldn't say regret, but I tend to think a lot about my learnings and whether that was, sufficient or whether that, where they came from and how they come from. So how can I maximize that? Right. And I think in my early years, I just didn't know how to learn. You got to learn to learn. And that, I think that came later. And it took time, not only because I was, remote alone in Canada and, the things were there. I mean, I don't think things were that different, in 2011 or 12, where I had access to internet and like everything was there. It was just that I wish I told myself that, there are resources that you have to be more diligent about reaching out to them. And I think I was a bit lazy and also at the same time cocky about, basically learning from the internet and reading and those things. I am doing a lot these days because I know how important they are, but I was just too young to really learn and be a better leader because I guess I didn't have that much of a push from the people that I had to lead. It was all, just four of us, all leaders. So, I think that would be learn to learn.
And do you have an inflection point or a time that you remember when you're like, oh man, I got to learn how to learn, or when it all sort of clicked?
Yeah, I think that came pretty frequently when, for example, like I would meet my friends that were in corporate, right? Doing accounting or whatever it is. It always like hit me really hard because one, I wasn't able to afford the things that they afford, but also at the same time, they seemed legit. The things that they did and things that they learned seemed legit, which I found out later weren't. But in the end, I think it was just about the social pressure of like, people are growing, but am I, right? It was constant, but I think it just got better and better, by having more people around me to inspire me. And that's why I think if you're starting out a company and you don't have any experience doing that, other than going to like networking events, I think it's just better to be around entrepreneurs who are your friends, who can actually share things with you. And whether they're co-founders, whether they're, from acceleration programs, I think that's very important to build that kind of being in that ecosystem where not just, you're not just networking, but also really sharing learnings and experience together, which is difficult these days because there's so many startups, so many ecosystems, we say. But then, surrounding yourself with the right people.
And so what's next for you and the GroupRaise team in Santiago?
So one of the things I actually wrote down what I wanted for my coming year was, to be able to, I actually told nobody this, to be able to have 20 plus people here. and to be in an international market, whether it be Canada or Australia, whatever it is, and to be able to know how to work and manage a development team, which I think takes a lot of learning and mistakes as a person who doesn't have any experience in coding nor computer science. So I think that last point, it's been very difficult. Not only working with my CTO was, that was not easy either, but, now that I have a team to manage that, that are supposed to build things that are amazing, but, obviously my communication isn't always effective. So just learning about the best way to, manage different disciplines is a big task for me.
Well, I think it's going to be fun to watch as you build that out here in Santiago, and I think you're going to definitely be able to do it. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you.
So where can people find more about GroupRaise and about you online?
Yeah. So if you type in GroupRaise on Google, it's there, groupraise.com. And, if you have any events coming up that you want to just go eat with friends and also have that be, supporting an awesome cause in your local area or anything that you support, there's that. For me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Sean Park, GroupRaise there. And, I'm honestly, I feel that coming to Chile, there's so many things that just came to us at like no cost. It was just like, for example, for you to participate in Startup Chile and get the money and be this provided with this amazing environment to work in. And there was just so many amazing things that were just given without us paying a single dime. And so, I take that as a responsibility to give back. Right. And so, anything that has, relations to marketing, especially email marketing. I didn't really talk deeply about email marketing here, but that is something that we do really well. And so I do have some experience to share. So, and I do also have some talks on YouTube. And if you just type in Sean Park GroupRaise, you'll be able to find it. But, otherwise, Sean at groupraise.com to, connect. And if I can help, that's also great.
Well, and you're likely going to be hiring in the Santiago office.
That's right.
If you're looking for a job, where's your hiring page? Where can they find?
Well, that's a great one that we currently don't have, but, you always have my email. And please, if you're in Santiago, look out on Discover Chile, which is also amazing how you can hire people from Facebook page. But yeah, we tend to hire very often these days. And so please be on the lookout and, feel free to reach out to us.
Well, thanks again for doing the podcast. This has been great.
Thank you, Nathan. This was a bit longer than I expected, but I felt like I was able to be myself with you. That was great. That's the goal. Yeah. That's what the best stories always come from, when it's just a conversation. Yeah. We could have had a beer here and no microphone, and it would have been just the same. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. No, thank you. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the episode with someone who you think might like it too. If you want to hear more about GroupRaise, check out episode 5 with Devin Baptiste, which is one of the most downloaded episodes in Crossing Borders history. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your day.